Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rest is Entertainment with me, Marina Hyde.
And me, Richard Osman. You sound like you're not in the same studio as me.
I sound like I'm not with you, and I feel like I'm not with you, Richard, which, as you know, is worse. I am in Corfu.
Whoa.
And I know, we're parted, but we shall soon be reunited. But I have to say, it's pretty nice.
How's the temperature?
It's hot, but apparently it's hot with you.
Yeah, but it's like English hot. So it's like unpleasant hot.
I mean, it probably gets to about 35, but there's always a breeze, and I don't mind it at all. I like it.
Wow, sounds absolutely awful.
Sorry, I won't bang on too much about it because there's nothing worse.
What should we talk about today? Or what are we going to talk about? I'm not going to pretend that we haven't decided already. What should we talk about? We just talk about anything.
With absolute inevitability, we are going to get to the Olympic opening ceremony.
Yes, I have some good insider goss on that as well.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to that because I watched it on a Spanish TV channel, but as we say, you don't need the commentary.
We're also going to talk about Brat and Brat Summers. You look like you're having a Brat Summer and Charli XCX and what that means.
I finally found my aesthetic has been vocalised for me and I've been seen, yes. And we're also going to talk about the absolute craze for Hollywood reboots. There are so many in the works. Many of films that were not even successful the first time round, or were, in my view, a distinct C or B movie. So we should be discussing those.
And also finally talking about Beverly Hills Cop 4, which we promised a couple of weeks ago.
Not a reboot per se, but in a way a reboot because it's been such a long time. Yeah.
But I've thrown it in with the reboots because I felt guilty we hadn't talked about it.
Yeah, and because you can. It's one of the things you can do.
Yeah, exactly. What are you going to do?
What?
out there in Corfu, like you give a toss. You just want this over with.
No, I don't, Richard. I've been looking forward to chatting. So why don't we get on to the subject of Brat?
Well, okay, let's do exactly that. And now it's come into the public consciousness via a number of routes. The Charli XCX album Brat, but now it has become more than an album. It's become an attitude. It's been co-opted by Kamala Harris. Can you talk us through exactly what Brat is and what it might represent?
Okay, Charli XCX had an album out, and I think it came out like June the 7th. It's her 6th album, so this is not some sort of sensational debut, etc. But it's really good. The album's brilliant. I can talk a bit later on. I will talk about how I think that they have pulled off this incredibly successful campaign to make it the viral aesthetic, viral attitude, whatever it is. People have tried to define it. She's tried to define it. She says, you're that girl who's a bit messy and loves to party and maybe says dumb things sometimes. She's honest, blunt, and a little bit volatile. Like I said, Richard, feeling seen.
Yes, I am feeling seen. Thank you for noticing.
Yeah. Fierce, hot, intimidating. People are saying it's inclusive, but it's also exclusive. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? But it's a sort of state of mind that has taken over the summer. And one of the noticeable things about it is this slime green. People are calling it lime green. No, thanks, boomers. By the way, I'm just not a boomer, even though my children have been calling me one the whole holidays. It's like this slime green colour, and it's got that very simple Arial typeface saying Brat, and it's been co-opted in millions of ways. It's currently, I believe, the header to Kamala Harris's presidential Twitter campaign that says Kamala HQ on the slime background. And Charli XCX has said Kamala is Brat.
Now, that front cover is very interesting because that's almost been the lightning rod. Because, you know, every year there's music which is I'm uncompromising, I'm slightly messy. Look at me, I'm arrogant, but I'm also vulnerable. I mean, that's been the stuff of youth culture and youth music forever and ever and ever. But this is massively caught on. So there's other things to it. That front cover is fascinating. So as you say, all it is a very lurid shade of green with the word Brat written on it, which, you know, looks like you knocked it up on Photoshop in an afternoon. But of course, they didn't knock it up on Photoshop in an afternoon. It's 6 months worth of kind of testing that. There were 500 different shades of green they looked at before they found the lime green. Now, what they're trying to do with that cover, and Charli XCX and the agency have been very open about it, we wanted to make something that looked like it didn't fit, that looked like it wasn't right, that looked like everything about it was just slightly off. So the colour, they went through 500 different ones until they went, yes, that is unpleasant. That absolutely, you just look at it, you think, oh no, I don't know about that colour. For the font, as you say, they went for an Arial or a variant of Arial. And again, they went through lots and lots. They wanted the one you think, oh, that doesn't, no, they haven't really, that's not right.
I type in Arial.
Oh, do you?
I like to type in it because it's aesthetically unpleasing. And I don't like to type in anything that looks like it's already on the pages of a novel. I like it to be really like basic. I've always typed in it.
I always write in very cheap notebooks because I like the idea of it with a Bic. That's what that's because I don't want to be too highfalutin. You know, I don't want to go, oh, look at me with my fountain pen and my my moleskin diary.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's deliberately, the aesthetic is deliberately off. It's the even the font size. They went, you know, slightly bigger it looked a bit better, and slightly smaller it looked a bit better. So we'd put it dead in the middle where it just doesn't look right at all. So it's very clever, and you know, the color, in the same way that pink or lurid pink was the color of last year because of Barbie, and that's a very marketable thing, just a color. That this slime green is the color of this summer, and it's instantly recognizable. To literally have a color that people suddenly go, oh yeah, that's Charli XCX. It's quite an impressive. It's quite an
It's
impressive
incredible.
trick to pull off.
She hasn't tried to copyright the colour, which, by the way, would be totally non-Brat.
Yes.
But she hasn't tried to copyright
that would be non-Brat, in my opinion.
Given that we're ruling everything, is it Brat or
Yes,
non-Brat?
is
It's
it
a
Brat or not?
taxonomy. Everything in the world by the end of this summer would have been described.
Yeah, Andy Murray.
Oh, Brat.
Brat.
Hugely Brat.
Of course he is.
Hugely Brat.
Of course he is.
Anyway, but she's obviously decided that mass adoption of this colour is much better than exclusivity, which it is. And in fact, they did launch a Brat generator microsite just in the launch phase of the album, actually before it came out, so that everyone could already start copying and memeing this thing and putting it out in millions of different ways, which has been a big help to kind of drive it. But all the speaking of this, you know, this colour, all the fashion houses have now started putting out, you know, edits of their slime green things, which aren't really slime green, because honestly no one would choose this color, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's slime adjacent, and
Yes.
you know, why don't you buy it? And because it's an attitude, but it's also like, if you start seeing it on the catwalks, which people are saying, maybe you'll start seeing it on the catwalks in September. Now those catwalks are for next summer, so if you see it then you can be sure that this is a very pervasive and very, very sticky kind of cultural trend.
If you see it on the front door of people's houses in Hoxton,
yeah,
you know, like then a couple of years ago, oh yeah, that's a little bit 2024, isn't it?
I think the number of it is on the chart in the sort of in the spectrum is it's #8 ACE00. So if you want to find the exact colour, that's what you look for.
You can imagine there's so many mums and dads right now having to go to B&Q with their daughters or sons and just literally going to the guy who works on the paint thing, just going, can you do this? And he goes, yeah, do you know what? I've done it 49 times already this week. Of course I can do that. And so,
well, you know, in last summer when they would, in fact, actually when they were shooting Barbie, they ran out of that particular shade of that pink, and they were painting at Leavesden, where they built it all and shot it. They ran out in the UK of the stuff of the various pigments that create that shade of pink.
It feels to me like, and listen, this is a theory and it's just come up to me, but perhaps we're going through a cycle of highlighter pen culture.
Yeah.
And next summer, I'm just going to invest in lurid yellow.
Go with the yellow or the pale blue, which always feels a little tasteful.
Do you know what? The blue, if there's 3, it's pink, green, and yellow, isn't it? And sometimes they come in a 4. You go, oh, you've just got like a blue that isn't even really particularly shiny. You haven't put any glitter in it. The blue in a highlighter pack should not be there. That's my bit. Anyway, that's just my theory. Highlighter pen culture.
We'll do a separate, I promise you everyone, we will do a separate item on what actually belongs in a highlighter pack.
Yeah, maybe.
Because this show is about entertainment above all.
Yes, maybe that's for subscribers only.
Yeah, join us in the inner sanctum.
Now, here's another interesting thing, I think. Now, there's always been very countercultural female pop music since the mid-'80s. I mean, before as well, but that's when it got massively mainstream, Madonna and so on. But the last 10 years, it really has been an absolute tsunami, you know, from Taylor onwards, Taylor and Olivia Rodrigo and Sabrina Carpenter and Chappell Rowan now as well, and Charli XCX. These incredible artists who seem to make their own music, write for other people, have their own uncompromising attitudes. I think when I was younger, a lot of music for teenage girls was sung by teenage boys and written by old men. And now you've got this incredible generation of women who are making their own music, writing their own music, marketing their own music, selling their own music. And it's been an incredible run of it for the last few years. And Charli XCX is just the latest version of this.
All the sort of alternative it girls who are part of the idea of the aesthetic, the attitude of Brat, people like Julia Fox, Rachel Sennett, Addison Rae, Gabriette, and then they
Addison
all
Rae, the
appear.
cab company.
Hudson Ray, yeah.
Okay.
They're just turning into your road. And then they all appear in the video for 360, and it's like people are saying that was like the Avengers Endgame of Brat,
Wow.
where like everyone has turned up for this thing. But
Bratwoman.
Yeah. Well, she does have a Bratmobile. This is the other thing. The real world, because obviously a huge amount of this thing and how it's gone viral is the way that everything goes viral, which is on social media and it's digital. But she did have this kind of bricks and mortar version of this as well. So, you know, she did a private show that she did on a private fan group chat. And then she said, I'm teasing this. And then like Julia Fox and Addison Rae performed at this show and went along to it. And then what they did is they got this wall in Brooklyn, in Greenpoint, and they put messages on it saying whatever it was, Brat was the first message, and then it kept repainting it with all these other messages. But that wall itself became a viral thing. But she went to the wall in a Bratmobile basically and stood out the roof of a car and sung, and it's like this crazy, like everyone's there. So there are these kind of real world. You can't just do it all as a sort of. I suppose we should say that for everyone that. And there are very few that have been this successful and this all pervasive. There are so many people like meticulously planning campaigns and say, and we'll do it like this, and then that, and we hope it will take off organically. You just have to hope that you've planted the seeds on good ground and it will work.
Well, that's it. That's it. You know, when people go, oh God, is it that easy to do? Oh my God, culture is so dumbed down. You think, well, no, because everyone is trying to do this. Firstly, they did it really, really well. Secondly, the album is absolutely incredible.
It's brilliant.
But that's the key. So what she's done is she's made an incredible album, and then she's done an incredible marketing campaign on the top of that.
I agree. And there's something about it being her sixth album. There is a thing, like all people who write in all different kinds of ways know, that moment where you've kind of, I'm not saying she hasn't found her voice on earlier albums, but suddenly like your voice is working and it's of its time and it just happened. It's a zeitgeist thing. And obviously the style and the aesthetic and the way that they particularly managed this campaign, all of those things, all of those moving parts have somehow just hit at the same time. And it's such a kind of confusing, it's such a complicated confection to make work all at once, and when it hits, it happens like this, and then you just think it's kind of irresistible. You might as well argue against gravity as not being as not seeing it and not.
Yeah, Brat is like gravity in that regard. No, she's such an interesting artist because, as you say, she's been around a long time. She was very, very underground at first, written loads of songs for lots of other people, Iggy Azalea, Blondie, all sorts of people. She sort of made a deliberate attempt to go quite pop for a while to see if she could crack the charts in that way, and sort of did, but it slightly didn't suit her.
Well, and a lot of this album is about that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And so she's finally found the way of doing the stuff that she loved, the underground stuff that she started out with, but doing it in a way that massively explodes into pop culture, which is very impressive. But it comes from being true to herself, I think. It comes from making great music, it comes from being true to herself. So by all means, listen to the album and not enjoy it. By all means, have the view that modern music is not like it was in the 80s or, whenever we were growing up. But that is demonstrably a brilliant album. She's a brilliant artist, is a brilliant record, it's a brilliant LP. And the fact that it's been marketed so brilliantly could make you resent it. But I think actually it's a masterstroke of 2024 culture.
The marketing is one of the things I think she's always had in a really uneasy relationship, is that kind of commercial thing where she was like, oh, they're making me do all these TikToks, or here's some marketing ideas for you. And this is like such a self-conscious joke about all of it. Like, it's disgusting. No one likes this. This is how, I'm doing it. I'm putting an actual war. All of it is much more of a joke. And it allows her to have to do all those things, which you do have to do if you want to get your album out there, and be authentic. And that's why it works. Like all of these things, it kind of, when you hit your voice, is because you're authentic and you're colliding with the times in the right way. But it's about, she's able to be authentic about the promotion now.
Oh God, I'm going to get hated for saying this, but it's got a lot of punk to it. The aesthetic of it is very punk. The fact that it's a person doing their own thing and absolutely being uncompromising is very punk. The fact that it's somebody making music which you could make in your bedroom if you really had to, but it's obviously the production is much more expensive than that, but it's doable. And someone who's made her own music for years and years and years, has made music in her bedroom, has made mixtapes, and suddenly doing these lurid Technicolor album, we think, well, that's That sounds like the Sex Pistols to me. Good luck to Neil with the post bag. But the other interesting thing it reminded me of a bit when I was reading a thing saying that the smell of Brat would be sweat and chips and Marlboro Lights. And you think, well, that sounds a lot like grunge.
Yeah.
But grunge was very, very male. And women, to get involved with grunge, had to slightly subsume themselves. And, in the 90s, you had that whole ladette culture.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this is women owning that culture more than they did in the 80s and 90s. This feels female-led rather than a male version of what they'd want females to be.
But it is also very modern in that it's got all those sort of little Easter eggs, that thing that Taylor Swift does where you have to sort of uncover all the clues and then maybe you'll know first. That whole thing with the Lorde, she's always been pitted against Lorde as artists, and Girls So Confusing was kind of about it. And then on that wall, they've finally removed the letters bit by bit by bit by bit until only Lorde were left. And then there's a remix of that in which Lorde kind of turns up and puts her side of the story, and they sort of reconcile at the end, which is quite a sort of Taylor Swift moved in some ways, just that sort of secret detective version, and then like, oh my God, look what I'm actually doing.
And also, I won't be rivals with someone just because you tell me I have to be. Yeah. I think the basic message would be, whatever you make of this music, if you don't like it, if you've got kids who are into it, if you're into it, if you've got friends who are into it, whatever you think of it, I think is an incredibly positive bit of our cultural life. I think it's a great record which will survive for a long time. I think it's very, very clever marketing. I think it's done by people who really understand what they're doing, who already get the jokes you think you're making, right? They're absolutely ahead of all of that game. So even if it's not for you, I hope you recognize as the summer goes on that something good is happening, and it's good for, teens who are listening to pop music, and it's good for our culture as a whole, I think.
Absolutely. The one thing I'm going to have to put slight brakes on is the idea. I think it was this morning, I don't know because I'm slightly on one day behind on everything, but I saw a Telegraph headline that said, the Brat British pop star who could decide the American election. No, that is one thing that won't happen. Yeah.
But again, because I said a while back about celebrities endorsing people, and obviously Kamala has adopted this thing. It doesn't make any difference. It's still my view of American elections. Two things don't make any difference: who supports you and what your backstory is. Never make a difference in American elections. But it's kind of fun, It's a fun thing, right?
It's a fun thing, absolutely. And there's no harm in throwing everything at it currently.
Yeah, but listen, so it can be a Brat summer, but it's not going to be a Brat American election.
No.
I
mean, I wish it would be, but I can assure you, that it's going to be an election that's great for women, allowing women to be how they want. Yeah, no, it's not going to be a Brat election, let me tell you.
Marina, favourite song on the album?
360.
Oh, it's interesting because often in conversation, you would then say to me, what's your favourite song? But listen, it doesn't matter. No, I tell you what, what's your second favourite song?
Von Dutch? No. What's your favourite song, Richard?
Oh, thank you for asking. I would say Von Dutch would be I love the fact we've chosen the singles. God, we're such parents. What are we talking about next?
We're going to talk about reboots because there is, obviously you will have noticed, there is an absolute craze for reboots. This year you've already seen Jake Gyllenhaal reprise the Patrick Swayze role in Roadhouse, or versions of. There's going to be a remake of Ghost. Channing Tatum.
And these, by the way, they're not sequels. They are remakes or reboots, reversions. Yeah. I
mean, Dirty Dancing. Before you think they're going through all the Patrick Swayze movies and just remaking them, which I've got a number of views on, they just pulled the plug on the last minute on a Dirty Dancing one, and are going to do it again because they have already done a Dirty Dancing remake, but they're still, it's now back in development.
If I know anything about Dirty Dancing, is you will not stop it.
You will,
You can't stop however you want to do it. Those kids will dance.
You will not place it in a corner. Yeah. No, you won't.
You will not put MGM in the corner.
No, you won't. So War of the Roses, Officer and a Gentleman, Parenthood, Splash, Spaceballs, Blair Witch Project, Happy Gilmore, The Matrix, Lord of the Rings again. These ones are also coming. The Running Man, starring Glenn Powell.
Glenn Powell. Listen.
We're going to talk about him again in a minute.
Oh, my
Heaven
goodness.
Can Wait, starring Glenn Powell. And I tell you what, Glenn Powell also wants to star in a remake of Backdraft.
I am interested in Glenn Powell starring in a remake of Backdraft.
I am interested in. I don't think I've actually been as here for a movie star. When I was laughing throughout Twisters, I was thinking I don't think I've been as here for anyone since maybe the pomp of Gerard Butler. I just there's something so funny about him. My admiration for him is semi-ironic.
And I like Gerard Butler and Glenn Powell both having names of people who I could have gone to primary school with.
I think both have at some point played the world's leading meteorologist, or certainly an expert meteorologist. But in a way, Glenn Powell, okay, who's supposedly the star of the moment and whatever, he wants to be in all these remakes. I feel that Glenn Powell is trying to remake all the movies from the era back when being a movie star meant being the biggest thing in the world.
Clever.
It's like a cargo cult. If he just remakes those movies, then he will be as big as the star of those movies were in those days, whereas no one is actually as big as that now, apart from just a very few, like, I don't know, The Rock or Tom Cruise or Denzel or whatever it is, but they're not even the same as they once were.
Let's do a film where Arnie has to travel through time to get Glenn Powell to save Hollywood by remaking all the films from the 1980s. That's a film.
It will happen. It will happen.
Glenn Powell can play Glenn Powell. Gerard Butler can play Arnie. We'll get a young director in.
Yeah.
Edgar Wright. He's what's he, early 50s? He'll do.
Yeah. That counts as very young these days. Short of Citizen Kane, they're sort of redoing everything.
Citizen Kane with Glenn Powell in the Orson Welles role.
Obviously, Glenn Powell's got to be on it. I went to Twisters on day one of opening, and that has turned out to be, by the way, a huge hit.
Huge.
That's gone way over the tracking, and that has made a huge amount of money. I don't know if you understand why when you see Glenn Powell in a wet t-shirt in a barn trying to explain something about super absorbent polymers, honestly, he's just saying science words, and you don't understand them, but you understand them more than Glenn does. I'll tell you the one thing you don't hear about in that movie is climate change.
Okay.
I can tell you, no, but it's interesting because part of the thing about reboots is everyone's saying, oh, why would you do it now? Or, Twisters, well, of course, that'd be related to climate change. I honestly thought you'd get one line about it in the movie. Like, why are we seeing this rash of these F5 storms or whatever they call them, the tornadoes? And you didn't get any. And I think it's because Glenn Powell has decided to adapt, in the words of Michael Jordan, that Republicans buy sneakers too. I don't think you'll see any of that stuff in a Glenn Powell movie. And you won't see it in a Sydney Sweeney movie either.
See, that's the thing with reboots, because listen, there's a lot of them, and they say, look, it's crushing originality and all that stuff. I don't mind them too much for a couple of reasons. So take for example, Outrageous Fortune. They are going to remake, okay? And as you say, Outrageous Fortune was a sort of a hit movie, not a massive hit movie. Shelley Long and Bette Midler, great film, came out in 1988. Now, since 1988, see, films quite often is archaeology. When we were growing up in the 80s, you could pretty much look back over the history of movies and know all the films. There was a canon and it was being built up, but, it had only been built up for sort of 30-odd years in terms of big movies. Now, since Outrageous Fortune came out, 72,000 movies have been released worldwide. 72,000 new films have been put on top of Outrageous Fortune. So nobody in the future is really ever going to dig down and find Outrageous Fortune again, is the truth. It's gone as a cultural artifact. Maybe a couple of people one weekend might take a look at it, but as a cultural artifact, it no longer exists. Whereas actually, you remake it. Firstly, you watch the remake. Secondly, you'll go back and watch the Shelley Long and Bette Midler original, and suddenly you found yourself an amazing movie. So I don't mind it, because I think a lot of those smaller films that are great films are buried. But as you say, the key is, I'm taking every single opportunity at the moment to ask Chris Columbus everything. While I have him nearby, I ask him everything. I was talking because the IP that he's been involved with, there's reboots swirl around it endlessly. You've got Gremlins, Goonies, Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire, Adventures in Babysitting, just an incredible sort of slate of things, all of which are kind of in that mix. And he said, well, I would never do a reboot unless, as you say, I have something new to say, unless there's a reason for making it in 2024, which we didn't have for making it in 1982. I can tell a different story because of the times, and I can use these characters that one generation understands to tell a story for another generation. Interestingly, the movie he's just been doing, not directing, is Nosferatu, the Robert Eggers movie. And, he said that, that essentially is a reboot, but of a film that was over 100 years old. So he said, look, I have some new technology I can use on this movie. And Robert Eggers is such a fascinating filmmaker as well that that's going to be an extraordinary reboot. But yeah, his view is exactly that of, I would remake Twisters if I could say something about climate change because I have something interesting to say about it. I could remake Ghost. I'm not quoting him. If I can't think of the joke about what that would be.
Well, no, they are actually doing it because they want to talk about mental health and depression, apparently.
Oh, Ghost, really?
Yeah.
And also, I guess
Channing Tatum wants to talk about those things with you.
I guess also we've had the Great Pottery Throwdown since then, so it's maybe there's a spin-off. Maybe it could be set on that. That's an idea, and then you have a competitive element to it as well.
And that's reboots have always existed, right? As long as there have been stories, there have been reboots. That's what folklore is. The Merchant of Venice is a reboot of The Jew of Malta, and first mention for Christopher Marlowe on the podcast. Just want to salute that.
It won't be the last.
It won't be.
I would like to see. You know who I'd like to see play Christopher Marlowe? Glenn Powell. I think he could pull it off. Don't you think?
I'm trying to think. Was somebody playing Christopher Marlowe in? No, no one was playing Christopher Marlowe in Shakespeare in Love.
I know Anne Hathaway was playing Anne Hathaway. That's all I remember.
She was. Yeah. Glenn Powell could certainly play Christopher Marlowe. What can't he do? But Hollywood in the golden age remade things all the time and remade really successful movies. Like if you look at the Philadelphia Story, which is fantastic. That's 1940 and it's got Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Jimmy Stewart. And then in 1957, they remake it as High Society with Grace Kelly, Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra. So that's a very little bit of time that's elapsed, and the movie was amazing in the first place. And it was just one of those things that it was accepted. You would rework properties, and people liked it. There's two things that I think are important here. First of all, is that they don't know what young people like at all, and they're trying to work out what young people like. What they can see is that they like watching TV programs that their parents watched. They like watching Friends. They like watching Gilmore Girls. They find things on TikTok and they kind of develop a sort of ironic interest in them that maybe then becomes a serious interest. And it's old stuff. They find old stuff and say, look at this. And it's a sort of weird nostalgia, that kind of false nostalgia for things you didn't actually experience. And, there's lots of people in the UK who feel like at some level they lived through the Blitz, even though they were born in the baby boom, if I may say, after the war, but they somehow at some level feel they lived through the Blitz and it was great. And there's that sort of feel to some of this, which is that there's a nostalgia for something that you didn't know the first time round. I also think it's really significant. We've talked about the gerontocracy before in politics and how it's just sort of bled into culture. It really has. There's a guy called Mike DeLuca who they got to be the kind of green lighting executive at New Line in 1993. He was 27 years old. 27. He did Austin Powers, he did Boogie Nights, he did Seven, he did all these sort of things like that, Rush Hour, all these kind of new things, and they were all massive hits, and it was a new kind of vibe, and he was brilliant. When they went to find someone to be head of Warner's Films last year, they got Mike DeLuca. Now, Mike DeLuca's now, he's now 57 or, 58, and all of the people who are greenlighting these films, who are at greenlight level, apart from about one, is in their 50s and 60s. And it sort of maybe shows that there's a big sort of let's make them like we used to feel to all of this. I do think there's a sort of comfort to all of that. It's like the Elasticated Waist movie, isn't it? It's like it's a feeling, it's a very risk averse era. And that's another thing we do see is that, and you saw with The Fall Guy, and even to some extent Mad Max Furiosa, people are not just interested in IP just because it already exists. And there's to use it as a crutch to say, oh, this thing is there, let's remake it, there's a residual affection for it. I think it's so risk averse, and it one step more than IP. We can't do anything unless there's some IP there. Is to remake IP that you've already made. That is very risk averse, and I think that the sheer volume of remakes coming out, it's difficult because the audience wants to go there, and if they think that that's where the audience wants to go, they think that's where the 18 to 34 audience wants to go, and they're just trying to keep an audience. But I don't find it particularly inspiring if so much of culture is a retread, and I don't necessarily believe that people use it to say something new always. I think mostly they just sort of, let's talk about Beverly Hills Cop 4. What was that say?
Listen, I'm going to shock you. I absolutely loved it.
I thought it was very
loved
good.
It. I thought it was good. I thought it was terrific. And I thought
Top Gun Maverick was good.
Yeah.
But it was But didn't you feel that it was just trying to get, and it is a diminishing return. It's not, it's, by the way, I've seen 2 and 3 many times at Beverly Hills Cop, and they're rubbish, particularly 3, the Alphabet Murders. And I think that, but it was trying to give you a feel of like that feeling that you got, it's chasing a high. You're trying to feel what it felt like when you're first, and I think it is a diminished return.
Honestly, I disagree. I tell you why I disagree. Is if Radiohead bring out an album and I like it, I want them to bring out another album. If I watch a series of The Sopranos and I like it, I want them to bring out another album. I think this idea that when something is made, it is then sort of cast in stone like Harrison Ford in Star Wars, and never to be seen again. I think I want to see it again. I love the film. Why would I not want to see the next bit of that film? Why would I not want to see those characters?
And he doesn't have the same. Eddie Murphy does not have the same joy of being on screen that he used to have. He just doesn't, and you can see that. And I felt that really strongly. And it's sad watching that. And it's to some extent, even though it was very well done, and great car chases, and the stuff with the daughter was good, and all that sort of stuff. And there is a level of soullessness to that kind of Netflix retread of it all.
I don't know.
Quite early on in the blockbuster era, relatively speaking, and it's that mood of the 80s, but it's like it's carefree. There's no message. You're just pumped. It's heightened. And if people are saying, well, that wasn't my 80s, it was the 80s of mass culture, but it's slightly trying to get you back to that mood in a time where we don't live like that anymore. And it isn't like that.
I don't know, because I think if I'm Eddie Murphy or Judge Reinhold or John Ashton or Paul Reiser or anyone who came back for this film, I would think, do you know what? I loved making that film. I'm really, really proud of that film. It's huge. People absolutely loved it. Why do I, of all artists, have to just go, okay, I won't do it again? Because, painters are allowed to paint similar things. Bands are allowed to make similar albums. Obviously, TV executives are allowed to make the same show again and again and again and again and again. And I would have thought, in a lifetime, you're allowed to make 4 versions of Beverly Hills Cop if it's something that people loved. I think it's you're right.
Allowed. I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it. Go ahead and do it. And it was done perfectly serviceably well, and it was really actually enjoyable.
Yes.
But for me, I find it quite sort of poignant at the same time. I really do, and I don't think it's saying anything about the passage of time or anything like that.
Do you not think?
Feel like
I thought it lent into the poignancy of it. That's what I love. I love something that's
you have to
40 years later. But when something's 40 years later, it has to be poignant. I think there's something rather lovely about that.
What do you think is going to... I mean, the St Elmo's, I'll be really interested to see what they do with St Elmo's Fire, because if they get them all back and it's miles later and it's much older, that will be interesting to see, because it was a movie about people and relationships and youth and that difficult time after college that people don't necessarily tell you about, and that will be interesting to see how their lives panned out. But that's not this I really felt was just trying to get you. It was, as I keep saying, it's chasing that first high, and it's never as good.
I will say, however, if you've been put off by reviews or anything, it's a lovely Saturday night, Sunday night, stick it on. It's a really good bit of entertainment, the new Beverly Hills Cop movie. Would you not agree?
Oh, it's great fun. And actually, I think probably quite a lot of the reviews have been, shoot me, but I love this. Even from quite implacable or hard to delight film critics, I think probably quite a lot have said this is fun. And also, it's on Netflix. They're not trying to make you get a babysitter or spend a huge amount of money or do whatever to come out to the cinema. It's on Netflix, so it's a good Netflix movie.
You mentioned right at the beginning there that they're thinking of doing a reboot of Spaceballs, which reminds me when I think in the 80s they first asked Mel Brooks about whether he would do a sequel to Spaceballs. He said, yes, I am going to do a sequel, and I've already got the title. I'm going to call it Spaceballs 3: The Search for Spaceballs 2.
That is brilliant. Another thing I would say is that because there are these old greenlighting executives and everything feels such a risk, and obviously the business is in trouble to some extent all the time. You're constantly reading crisis narratives. There are very few young directors doing things, and young directors are often given a reboot to start their career. I mean, Nia DaCosta, who is sort of fantastic, she did the Candyman reboot. She's very young. But in general, you don't see that many young directors and that rebooted the franchise, by the way. That made it sort of successful again. And she had Jordan Peele as a sort of mentor on that. But you don't really see that many young directors. It's no one's sort of giving them money. The older people are kind of hoarding the money to themselves, and you're not seeing young people given the chances to come up with things. And I feel that is another issue that again should be addressed, because if you're trying to appeal to young people, it's probably better to probably a good idea to risk some of your money by paying one of them to try and make something that people of their age might like.
I mean, as always, it comes down to the fact that movies remain very expensive to make, and there is not enough money around. Now, something's going to happen to that, which is movies are about to get much cheaper to make for a number of reasons, and that will change the culture, and that will change Hollywood. But for the moment, we're in this spot of fewer people are going to the movies, and movies are costing as much as they always used to, and so that's why we find all those decisions being made. I think it's a sort of we're in stasis until movies get an awful lot cheaper to make.
Tell me a movie you would like to see remade, Richard.
I would say I'm surprised they haven't remade it. Towering Inferno would be a good one. It had so many stars in it. It was one of those great. You remember those movies where every single person was a star? The Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno. I'd love to see that with Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney, please.
They're already attached.
Yeah, and there's like a French billionaire played by Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah.
Hold on,
stars on every floor.
This episode is brought to you by Sky.
Now, Richard, you have a brother.
I do.
The wonderful Matt Osman from Suede.
Why do you ask?
Would you describe yourselves as close?
Yes, different industries, but yeah, we love each other.
You sound closer than the two brothers in the new Sky original, Mr Bigstuff. Stars Danny Dyer as Lee,
please.
An alpha male with a prescription drug addiction, as well as a biscuit tin full of their dad's ashes. Also,
Okay.
Yes, please. And Ryan Sampson as Glenn, a nervy perfectionist and carpet salesman striving to live the suburban ideal with his fiancée. Glenn's life is very peaceful and exactly how he likes it until his brother comes crashing into their lives, and it's not long before their perfect lives start to unravel faster than the weave of a cheap carpet. Ryan Sampson also wrote the series. He's an absolutely fantastic comic actor. He was in Plebs and, of course, Brassic, another Sky comedy.
All episodes available to watch now, only on Sky.
The Olympic opening ceremony, can we talk about that next?
Yes.
Because that occurred on Friday evening and in Paris. And I mean, I love a big swing. They went for such a big swing. And I fear to say, I thought it rather missed, which was a shame, because I love it when people try something completely radical and different, and fair play to them for giving it a go. It probably looked great on the little model that they built.
Yeah, well, listen, it was a great moment on Twitter, that's for sure. It was one of those uniting moments. Yeah, as you say, it's interesting. We constantly say culturally, oh, people need to take more risks. Why are we so safe? And what they really did was take a risk. And actually, the idea of taking it out of the stadium, where these things always are, and putting it on the streets of Paris, showing off these incredible buildings, incredible French artists, I thought it was a great idea. I mean,
when you read it, so did I. But when you saw it, what did you think?
Well, firstly, it was raining.
I know, I can't bear it, the weather. I mean, I looked at the weather. The only thing that worked with our terrible Wi-Fi was the weather map. And you could just see this one blob over the whole of France, which is a dark yellow. And that was it. That was this enormous storm. Everywhere else seemed to be sunny.
But also, it's a weird sort of twofold thing in that it went on for a really, really long time, and the rain continued throughout, both of which are quite rare. So it went on a very long time. The rain continued throughout. Creatively, I thought it was a great idea. Lovely to have everyone go up the Seine. That's lovely. Great to mix up. Normally they'd have the parade, then they have normally they'd have the show, then they'd have the parade, then they have the formalities. And on this, they sort of mixed everything up. They had the formalities at the end. And it was all directed by an avant-garde French theatre director called Thomas Joly. And he was the creative director in the way that Danny Boyle was the creative director of London 2012. So I think for absolute full marks for trying. I think the fact that it went through France, the interesting thing about this is it's the difference between sitting around a table having an idea and then watching it go out, which I've done a million times. And you can have ideas that around the table you think this is great, and then in a run through you think, yes, this is really, really working. And then the second it goes out, you think, oh, of course, it's much, much, much too long.
But it doesn't work. Also, you can tell he was a theatre director, because I didn't think it worked as a TV spectacle.
Yes.
It's important that people understand that this is almost always the biggest rating event of the entire Olympics. People are into lots of events, and you think it would be the 100 metres men's final, but it's not necessarily. The opening ceremony is always enormous. In the UK, it got, I think, 7.8 million at its peak. And I say it at its peak because I don't think everyone stuck around for the whole thing. In NBC, it got 60% more viewers than their version in Tokyo did when back in 2021, because those were the games that were delayed. But that, if only it were a ratings game, that isn't it, because it just didn't work as a TV spectacle, I think. And it must have looked great on the maquette when you've got the whole set, because you can see it all at once. But the whole point of the screen is that it's very limiting, and that's in a way why, when you work within a stadium, you are working. He would have been better off doing that as a theatre director, and he would have been better off translating to TV that way if he kept it within the stadium. And I think it's significant that many of the bits that were in the stadium were the bits that were most successful. The Cauldron was, I thought, incredible with the balloon and things like that. But the inclusion of many elements. I love the Minions. Why were they there? The one with the mask, the one who was doing the sort of parkour over the roofs of Paris, that was odd.
Also, by the way, can I just say one thing? We've learned one thing from popular culture in the last 10 years. If somebody is wearing a mask, at some point they must be unmasked, and the reveal must be unbelievable.
You're a theatre director.
Yeah.
What on earth? What happened? Why wasn't it unmasked? And it was, obviously Macron or someone, just because it has to be. But it should have been unmasked.
Yeah.
Why didn't they do it?
And it's Danny Dyer.
Yeah. Britain's hardest Olympic ceremonies. France's hardest Olympic ceremonies.
That would have broken Twitter, wouldn't it? If suddenly
it would have been amazing. But
evening.
I have always got, if there are dignitaries suffering, which there were, and in the rain, you can put, as the expression goes, hang that in the Louvre for me. I love to see some of the worst people in the world, these Middle Eastern princes whose countries flay their athletes. If they're getting rained on, I love it. So that I enjoyed that bit. But let us be honest, opening ceremonies are almost without exception sort of gibberish and really quite bad. And there have been, in my recent memory, two great ones, and I was very fortunate to be in the stadiums for both of them. Once, the first one in Beijing.
Coincidence? I think not.
Yeah, I'm the lucky charm. They should have had me over there in Paris. But the Beijing, which was absolutely incredible. And when you were in the stadium, those drums, obviously the drums were amazing on TV, but if you're in the stadium, you were the beat. You could feel it, your whole chest, the whole thing. At no point in that ceremony, and this is the other thing, is that in general, ours is an exception. Obviously, ours is the second very good one, I think the 2012 one. But at no point in that thing, you would not have felt it was weird if the stadium in Beijing had just opened up the floor and a massive super weapon had come out. I mean, this was like, China was announcing themselves to the world. It was like, all your economies belong to us. There's a nuclear weapon's going to come out of this. This is like the Death Star or Bond lair with a better percussion section. That is it. And there was something extraordinary about being there and feeling that this is like a real cultural moment where and we looked back a lot in our ceremony and maybe that says something about where our respective empires are. But I wasn't sure. This was more of a tourism advert rather than whereas London 2012 wasn't a tourism advert. It wasn't saying like, come to London, any of this. It was saying, this is our culture, this is our history, this is who we are. And whether or not you agree with that particular take on it, and many people loved it, and probably many other people thought, I don't like this at all. What on earth is the NHS even doing in this? Which was sort of inspired and bonkers and brilliant, in my view.
It was like a reboot of the NHS.
Yeah, it was.
Written by Frank Cotterill Boyce. Which
happened only in that stadium, sadly not in the wider, actually, NHS estate. But anyway, and so I think you sort of want it to feel like either a Bond villain has hired Busby Berkeley, or in the case of ours, that William Blake and George Orwell had hired Busby Berkeley. You didn't get that in Paris at all. You didn't get. I mean, it seemed. I loved some of the stuff, but not a lot of it.
I will say this: the French perceive it to have been an absolute triumph.
Yeah.
In France, the mood is that it was an absolute tour de force. I think they've just been through a very bruising series of elections where the far right has been on the rise, and I think they saw something that's celebrated a diversity that's not always celebrated in France. And they thought that it was a triumph. There were some wonderful moments in it, of course.
Do they like that, you think? I'm not sure that. Yes, I mean, I'm not sure the recent electoral results suggest they do 100% love the diversity.
Certainly, the organisers and the Olympic Committee and the French sport world thought it was a roaring success. Some wonderful bits of it. The robot horse, of course, was wonderful.
terrific,
I want to
yeah.
see more robot horses. Celine Dion making a comeback was incredible. As you say,
She saved it.
the cauldron was amazing. Although I thought it was going to be up in the sky forever, which would be
Yeah.
quite cool. But now it's grounded again. I want to talk a little bit because I know you didn't see the UK feed of it. You were watching
No.
somewhere abroad, and I wanted to talk a bit about our coverage of it. 'Cause it was commentated on by Andrew Cotter and Hazel Irvine, who I think are two of our absolute finest broadcasters. I mean, they're both absolutely extraordinary. And I want to talk about the incredible job they did, is the truth, because I've had a little chat to a few people who were behind the scenes. I had a little chat to Andrew Cotter as well. And Hazel and Andrew have done these opening ceremonies ever since Rio, Commonwealth Games and Olympic. And Andrew Cotter says, this is the gig that I value the most. He said, this is a huge deal. He said, it's important and I take it incredibly seriously. I love it and I want to get it right. Ordinarily, in fact, in every single other case, you would have a dress rehearsal a couple of days beforehand. There was no dress rehearsal at all for this. Firstly, because you can't really do a dress rehearsal up the Seine. Secondly, the creative director wanted everything to be a surprise. Okay, so they have no idea what is going to happen and when. They have no idea that Lady Gaga and Celine Dion are going to be doing their things. They've got no idea of that. They have no talk back from the director, which they would normally have, because all of it is supposed to be a surprise. Little things like they didn't know who the torchbearers were going to be. They didn't know who was going to light the cauldron. So right at the very end, the most important thing in any Olympics is lighting that cauldron, which is an extraordinary moment. And so as they're going up, the reason you got Andrew Cotter and Hazel Irvine is Andrew Cotter recognises Teddy Riner, the French judoist, and Marie-José Pérec, the sprinter. Right? He knows who they are, but lots of the countries did not know who was lighting the cauldron.
Oh my God, this is like an anxiety dream.
Because they hadn't been told. Andrew Cotter as well, he's done months and months and months of research on every single country, so he's got all these great facts and fun little things. But because they're on a boat, he's got about 15 seconds to talk about all of them, and then suddenly they're cutting to a dance routine that he didn't know was going to happen. The final indignity for both of them is that they're in the open air. Obviously, it's raining. They had umbrellas up, but all of the broadcasters are told to put their umbrellas down because it was blocking the view of the horse. And so they were literally, him and Hazel Irvine, absolutely soaked to the skin. He says, like Zinedine Zidane picks up the torch. I had no idea he was going to get it. Gives it to Rafa. Obviously, I recognise him. I didn't know they were then going to go on a boat. And he goes, and I recognise, of course, that's Carl Lewis, and I know that's Rafa, I know that's Serena. He said, it took me a while to recognise a mid-60s Nadia Comaneci. He said, because I didn't know they were going to be on a boat. I didn't know who was going to be on the boat, and I didn't know where they were going. And so the two of them, I think, did such a magnificent job. And you can tell with Cotter especially, he's a very funny man. But he said, you can't go full Norton on these things. You can't go full Graham Norton because it's important, and the Olympics is about something, and you could tell that. So all the way through,
you can't ironize everything, and there is a sort of thing where people now just say, "Why couldn't we have commentary from XYZ as well?" Because what they want you to say is, "Oh, this is all absolutely ridiculous." It's like, don't worry, you can read all that in the papers the next day. In fact, you can read it about 5 seconds after this interminable show has finally finished.
Exactly,
but. You don't need to ironize everything, and there's enough that is ironized that I suppose you just sort of have to take it seriously.
But, and interesting, after we talked last week about the one thing to really look out for, and you made this point, which is absolutely right, is innovation in camera work, innovation in shots. And the shots were what really let it down. Because you hadn't anything to cut away to, because the crowd were all on the banks. Let me
tell you an innovation. You can wipe the lens.
Yeah.
You can get these raindrops on.
Yeah.
I also felt that the crowd were like one deep on the Seine and sometimes none deep. And you did slightly have that sense that everyone had been, which you never want to hear and which cities always complain about, in my experience, and everyone I've ever covered and everyone where I've gone to the city, people hate the fact that people have been, made to move and leave the middle of the city in order for it to become a lockdown zone. But as you see on the day, clearly these mega events are incredibly vulnerable to terrorism and to vandalism and to just any kind of disruption. But it did feel strangely spectatorless in some ways.
Yeah, well, I think the rain may have had something to do with that as well. I'll say a couple of things. Firstly, Andrew Cotter and Hazel Irvine just proved themselves to be the absolute consummate broadcasters, and the BBC are incredibly lucky to have them both. Secondly, genuinely, the French feel like it went better than we felt that it went. And thirdly, we're definitely going to remember it.
Oh, yes.
You know, it's like there's loads of opening ceremonies we don't remember. We're not forgetting that in a hurry.
There are very few that you do remember. I also think that part of the reason, if you go, when you're in France, if you watch their TV, it is very, very different to ours. And a lot of their culture, in lots of ways, there's this whole thing of like the French films are for French. They when you go to a cinema, they have very, very few American films on. It's a much more, or even international films. They are very big on preserving their own culture, and in a sense that their culture has become slightly siloed in some ways, so that what's good TV in France, or what is regarded as good TV, is not the same as the rest of the world. I mean, my husband and I used to laugh when he lived in France for a bit, and you'd watch TV, and an enormous amount of things right up into the sort of 2010s were involved people, dinner audiences, watching something occur on the stage was TV on lots of shows. And you thought, this is so odd. I can't really imagine lots of little white tablecloths and people sitting around watching whatever it was that's happening, and this being a TV spectacle, because it's not like what our TV looks like anymore, and it never really did in the first place. It looked a bit more like something like this, but a long time ago. And their TV is different. We
would sell game shows to the French, which would run for 45 minutes, and you'd watch them. And you go, oh, this is 4 hours long. That's interesting. And like in the middle of it, there'd be like a group of people just talking on a sofa. You go, so what's this bit? Oh, they're talking about county planning laws. It's just in the middle of it. We like to, because just in between the rounds, we thought it'd be interesting. You're like, okay, that's listen. It's different, isn't it? It's different. The tropes and the mores of French television are totally different. And if they loved it, then I guess it spoke to those. And if people at home thought it was long, Thomas Joly, the creative director, the theatre director, the previous thing he did before he took this gig was a reimagining of Shakespeare's Henry VI and Richard III called H6R3, which was 24 hours long. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine? So honestly, I think we got off pretty easy. This was not the director's cut, clearly, of this thing. Yeah. Otherwise, of the opening ceremony. Goodness me. Now, Richard, do you have any recommendations this week? I do. We just finished watching a 3-parter on Netflix called Dirty Pop, which is about Lou Pearlman, who managed Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and had lots of other shady enterprises. It's really, really good. Loads of great archive of those bands and other less successful bands, and an extraordinary story of this guy, Lou Pearlman, who lived a very unusual life, I would say. But it's really, really good. Dirty Pop, it's called. So send in any questions to therestlessentertainment@gmail.com. Enjoy the sunshine. I will do, and I hope you. There is sunshine, or was it just heat? Yeah. I mean, where we are right now is a very, very hot basement, but about 40 to 50 feet above us, the sun is shining. When you emerge, I wish you a lovely day, and it was so nice to see you all. Take care. Bye-bye.